Welcome back to the agenda. So with the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana having gazetted regulations that exempt Eskom from disclosing irregular and fruitless expenditure in its annual financial statements, we now really ask, how is this really going to work and what this really means for transparency of this critical power utility? To answer this question, we are now joined via Zoom by Mr. Martin Buys, who is the Acting Chief Financial Officer of Eskom. Mr. Buys, good morning to you. Welcome to the agenda and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Good morning and good morning to your viewers.
I think you certainly are quite new in the position. I know that you were appointed just under 6 days ago, and now you've got a lot of questions to answer where this matter is concerned. But I think the first place to start would be really just to clarify how this exemption really works, right? You've given us a statement from Eskom that says, by allowing Eskom to report on irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure in its annual report, and not its financial statement, Treasury ensures that reporting transparency and accountability is not compromised. How does that work? Where's the transparency?
Okay, if I can explain it like this. So in the past, the auditors would actually audit Eskom in terms of its annual financial statements. Let's call it the IFRS part of it, and then also the PFMA part of it. And Eskom had to report completely in terms of the PFMA, irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure in its annual financial statements. What National Treasury has now done is in January, they issued an instruction note that said all entities will in future report the full disclosure of the irregular expenditure and the fruitless and wasteful expenditure in its integrated reports. In the case of Eskom, the only thing that you need to report in your annual financial statements is the irregular expenditure and the fruitless and wasteful expenditure relating to the reporting year and the prior year. What they've said now to Eskom is that you don't need to report that expenditure in your annual financial statements, but you report it in your integrated report. It still means that Eskom will have to make full disclosure in its integrated report and not in the annual financial statements anymore. The auditors will still audit the disclosure in the integrated report, and they will then still have to identify if there's any irregularities or anything that Eskom should report, which Eskom has not reported on. So that is how it is now going to work in the future. One of the big benefits to Eskom is that the auditors in the past, they actually reported on it in the annual financial statements, and Eskom's annual financial statements were always qualified. As the auditors said, they cannot place reliance on the completeness and the accuracy of the opening balances of the fruitless and wasteful and the irregular expenditure. Now they will not put any qualification in Eskom's annual financial statements, which is going to be a benefit to Eskom, because quite often we have to enter into international markets and even the local markets to secure funding. And specifically, other entities don't report in terms of the PFMA, and that is always a disadvantage to Eskom. So now by removing it, it will actually now make it easier for Eskom. But we must also understand that this is only a reprieve for basically 3 years, which is going to be for FY23, 24, and 25. And after that, Eskom will have to report in its annual financial statements. So it gives Eskom an opportunity to clean up the past so that the auditors can actually be comfortable regarding the completeness and the accuracy of the information.
Yeah, so there's a lot of technicalities here, and I think it's important that we just maybe take this one bite at a time so that the viewer is able to understand what we're talking about. Well, you say that the disclosures will be made in the integrated report. Where does that go? You say that's shared with the auditors. What then? What happens to that? Where does that knowledge then go about what our irregular and fruitless expenditure actually looks like within Eskom?
Look, the integrated report is a report that gets tabled in Parliament as well, and Eskom makes it available to anybody that wants to look into the integrated report. It is available on Eskom's website, and we do make available printed copies of the integrated report. So it will be a definite section in the integrated report itself. It is the full disclosure as if it was in the annual financial statements. The only issue now is that it is in the integrated report and not in the annual financial statements anymore.
I think the real concern here, and we understand that why this exemption is being granted to Eskom is to protect the credit rating of the power utility. But then you've got reports that these exemptions also include losses due to criminal conduct, criminal and disciplinary action as well. Surely that's information that is important even for a foreign investor.
Now, what we will do in terms of the integrated report, we will actually report still on the criminal losses due to criminal conduct. And we will also report on consequence management, because we have to follow through with consequence management, and we will have to make proper disclosure in terms of those requirements as well.
So then if these disclosures are then taking place, even where you're speaking to international funders, why then go about this exemption? I mean, talk to me about the conversation that was had within Eskom when the chairperson of Eskom wrote the letter to Treasury requesting these exemptions. What did those conversations look like?
I think the issue is that the auditors always qualified Eskom on its reporting in terms of the PFMA. And the auditors were always concerned around the completeness and the accuracy of the past information. So in terms of the PFMA reporting, what an entity has to do is to show what was the opening balance, what is the new expenditure, if you have condonation of any of the expenditure, and then what is the closing balance. And the auditors has always said they can't rely on the opening balance in terms of its accuracy and completeness. And therefore, they qualified Eskom's financial statements on that basis. So when lenders look into that specifically, they then start questioning, why is there a qualification on Eskom? But it is only because of the PFMA that Eskom is qualified, and it's not in terms of international financial reporting standards that the qualification is. So now, with a full disclosure in the integrated report, and I must make it clear, it's going to be exactly the full disclosure, the qualification will now move out and will not be reported on by the auditors, but they will still audit in full.
Okay, well, the chairperson of Eskom requesting this exemption, I mean, is this to some extent an admission by Eskom that the utility is completely or has completely lost control of criminality within the utility, irregular and fruitless expenditure, that you simply cannot put a lid on it at this point, and so you need to then mitigate ways of what information you communicate? I mean, one would worry that this almost adds fuel to the fire of the conversation that the former CEO, Andre de Ruyter, has talked about irregular expenditure and criminality within Eskom.
No, I don't think so, because if you look at the irregular expenditure over the past couple of years, since we started with our process to clean it up, the irregular expenditure in the specific years has reduced considerably. You must understand that if Eskom entered into a contract and it is an irregular contract, it simply means that Eskom did not comply with a certain policy. It doesn't mean there is an issue with the contract itself. And you cannot now just stop the contract because if it is irregular, it will be unfair on the supplier. So what Eskom then has to do is to report on an annual basis the expenditure on those type of contracts. But if you start looking at irregular expenditure and specifically at new regular expenditure, you will see that there's a remarked reduction in the irregular expenditure. So that Eskom is busy with the cleaning up process. The only benefit to Eskom is that it will allow us now a couple of years to make sure that we can record on the past correctly and that completeness. If you look at the opening balance and the total irregular expenditure reported, you will see that Eskom has actually reported a fair amount of irregular expenditure and also fruitless and wasteful expenditure over the past couple of years as we start cleaning up. But that process has not been complete.
Okay, well, we'll be watching closely as well. Thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. And there, Mr. Martin Bass, the acting Chief Financial Officer at Eskom, speaking to us via Zoom.